are you today, brother?
I'm doing good. Another day, another dollar. So I know it's like cliche, but I mean, it's totally true, especially these days.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Speaking of which, thank you for your time. I know your time is valuable. So I definitely just want to say up front that I really do truly appreciate it.
Oh, thanks, man. I'm glad you feel that way.
So my name is Jessie Hobson. I write for a website called CineDump.com, based out of Houston, Texas. I just want to get started again because I know your time is valuable.
Okay, Rush.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, sir. So I watched Of the Devil. I watched it last night. And I'd assume maybe you were only on set maybe 1 or 2 days, just based on how much I saw you in the film.
Yes.
First off, how did you get involved in the production?
I was contacted by the director, Kelton Jones, and he had written this part with me in mind. And we had a call, and we talked about the story. And then he sent me the screenplay. I read it, and I gave him my honest feedback on the character that he'd constructed for me with respect to his compliment, because I saw it as a compliment. And I was kind of surprised that he was open to some of my feedback in terms of some of the social political commentary that he had kind of constructed around the character in relationship to the circumstance. I generally kind of try to stay clear of that sort of thing. I don't like to play politic within film. I like to just stay clear of things that I feel that are not aren't useful in driving the story along. And I explained that to him. I expressed to him, can we please remove these references? The culturisms, some of the stuff that I felt, like I said, did not pertain specifically to what the issue was that the child that was brought to this shaman, this kind of darkness, this black shaman, so to speak, didn't really pertain to the issue, which is that the child was struggling either psychologically or spiritually. And I wanted the focal point to be more about that conflict, that query, that disposition in terms of what the child was bringing to the circumstance, and how the shaman was able to look at him and see him, and to start that communication with the father and not let anything else interfere or sidetrack the dilemma or the challenge that the child and the father faced. So I thought let's just focus on this and remove the excess. And he agreed. And so answer your question, once we decided that some of the material needed to be rewritten, he rewrote it for me to tailor make it so that I felt comfortable. And then we moved on from there. And next thing I know, we're making the movie.
Yeah, I know of Kelton, through some of his other works. I've actually interviewed James Colin Bresick, the other writer of the film. So that's pretty interesting to hear that you had a kind of a hand in kind of shaping the story as far as your character, the surgeon. Speaking of which, there's a scene with you and you're kind of like speaking in tongues, and I was curious, was that actually scripted? Like, was that scripted dialogue, or were you just kind of improving it? I know you have somewhat an accredited background as far as your acting. So I was curious as how that went down.
That's an actual language. It's a dead language. I think I don't know if it was Latin. It was, I don't know what period, maybe 17th century. It was a language spoken by a group of these renegade, I don't know if they were shaman. I don't know if they were definitely at war with what people conceived to be the Holy Roman Church. There was a group of men who were basically declared war against the church, and they had developed a language, and in general, and then also utilize some of it to cast spells and to do things. And so the reference material was real. It wasn't made up. I actually went online and did the research and had to study the language and learn the intonation and how to execute it properly. It was quite a process to try to figure out the rhythm of the language, uh, the sound of it, because it's so unlike anything that I normally deal with when I communicate with people. But then once I was able to figure out the patterning, like music, I was found myself saying it quite often and would mess with people periodically, just throw a line at somebody like, what the hell was that? What does that mean? It would freak people out.
Yeah,
So I wanted to get comfortable with it, is my point.
awesome. Yeah, that definitely makes that scene a lot more powerful. I mean, not that it wasn't already, but the fact that you put in the extra effort, I think, especially aspiring actors can totally appreciate, as well as the viewership here. As we mentioned, there's like the big scene, and then there's a scene in the beginning. You're one of the top billed names for this one. For someone that has put in so much work, how does it feel, being a selling point, for a film? Like, that has to be rewarding, people sending you photos of these films and your name's all like always near the top. How does that feel for you?
It feels like a paradox. I'll explain this. It feels good, and I'm grateful that for some that's the perception, especially when I consider how many years I've had to endure what some people would perceive as indignity because of the tattoos, and despite obvious ability I may or may not have, depending on who you talk to, there was a tendency to try to ignore or put to the back that, kind of like what African Americans had to deal with in the 50s, very talented, credible dancers, singers, performers, and yet we're not allowed to come to the forefront of the play or to be showcased because of a stigma or misperception or prejudice, or just good old fashioned ignorance. And I felt for years that I was treated a certain way because of the ink. This is many years ago. And so to live in a time now where so many young people from various walks of life are experimenting with body art, and it's commonplace, and it's also quite beautiful and extremely artistic. They've made leaps and bounds in terms of the art form since what I remember back in the old days. The standard stencil, kind of paint by numbers tattoo type
Yeah.
thing. They've really taken it to levels that I never would have imagined, and the people that are walking around communicating their feelings, their ideologies, their personal expression seem to be everywhere these days. And so in that sense, I feel grateful that the social dynamic has changed, which I think has influenced somewhat how movies are being constructed, how I am now being allowed to be presented uh, as someone who still has an ability, which I feel like I've had, but it's not being ignored or hidden away like some ugly secret. It's like there's an appreciation for how I collaborate with filmmakers, other actors, the entire film production. I feel grateful and think that the independent productions are a revelation, at least for me, because what I notice about them is that they're much more forgiving. They're not like the corporate that has a very specific formula in mind for mainstream consumption. And it's fine. Like, I'm not knocking mainstream consumption, but I'm part of the 30% that likes to watch films that are a little bit weird, I guess,
Mhm.
off the beaten path,
Yeah.
and don't play into conventional formula ideologies. So to be a part of any production these days, and I'm noticing more and more, I'm being invited into circumstances where I am allowed the position that you mentioned, second, third, or even fourth position, and a selling point for the product, for the piece, for the artists, the artists slash director, producers opus to me is quite a compliment. It's somewhat surreal though, because it hasn't quite sunk in yet, because I'm not staring at it all the time. I'm not really thinking about it much. I'm just trying to get on with my day-to-day life. So there are times when it seems almost abstract. I don't make the connection. When someone like yourself or other people compliment me, I don't always know how to respond to the compliment. And it's not because I'm playing pity party for myself. It's just for so many years, I've got used to people throwing rocks and then running away. For example, for at least a decade in the 90s, I would go on multiple auditions for television series and high profile movies and things like that, and engage casting directors. And this was a recurring theme, that I would go on an audition and the casting director would look at me and say, "Excuse me, the messenger entrance is around back. Like, you're in the wrong place."
Yeah.
And I would say very politely, "Excuse me, ma'am, I'm not here to deliver a package. I'm here to audition." And she would look me up and down like, okay. And I remember how I was treated. And it's not to say that I carry bitterness or that I carry um any of that. It's just that I guess after so many years, it's just you're not used. It takes a while to get used to the flip side. When the coin flips the other way,
Mhm.
you're still
Yeah. Yeah.
the compliment, but then it's still like, oh, that's nice, but I don't let the ego get a hold of it, because at the end of the day, brother, I just feel like I'm an artist and I'm just trying to do my best to assist other artists in the collaboration to build something like a house that people can sit in, they can look at it, and for a moment of time be entertained by. Not everybody's going to like it. Critics, are notorious for ripping things apart. I tend not to look at what people write, because even films, interesting phenomenon I noticed is that I've watched films that I thought were mind-blowing, brilliantly written. The cinematography was genius, the story, the acting, everything. And then I look at like Rotten Tomatoes and how they evaluate things, or some other list of critics, and the way, and I asked myself, did you guys see the same movie that I saw? And then
Yeah.
the stuff that all this, they champion the glory of other things, and I watch and I can't get through the first 10 minutes of it. And I think, oh, so my point is that I think that this is a subjective medium, right? And you got to be careful. It's like me trying to tell you what music to like. How can I do that?
Yeah.
Some people are going to be affected by this film of the devil. Some people may not be. Uh, so I try not to get, it was Gary Shandling who told this British comedian, he said, don't get too attached to the results of your work. And I understood the profundity of that comment that he made to this British comedian, because he realized that if you do that, you have to bear the negative and positive poles and the constant back and forth with that. Just kind of let it go and just move on, and realize that as a consumer, because I'm a consumer too, I watch films, that my tastes are simply my tastes, and not everybody's going to agree. And I think the beauty of it is that there's so much product out there that people can investigate, and not everybody's going to like the same thing. It's interesting. You get a group of people and they say, what do you want to watch? Well, I don't want to watch that. Does that mean that the film is bad, or it's simply not their cup of tea? So I think that what I'm learning more and more is just to do the work, be grateful to be able to collaborate with people to take it serious enough to try to produce something that is at least engaging for 90 minutes, or at least attempts to do something to affect somebody's life. So for 90 minutes out of the day, they can escape, the day-to-day, grind, like you said earlier, just another day and another dollar. So you watch a movie, ideally, to enter this other world, like when you go to sleep at night and you dream and it takes you away to some other place. That's what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for perfection. I'm really not. I'm simply looking for a film, and it's in the way that the characters are developed, the way it's written, the way it's photographed, and maybe some of the score, the music, to kind of pull me into this other dimension so that I can escape the position that I'm in that feels sometimes very constricting and confining. And I think people use film or movies and music to do that, to kind of leave the world. Like it's a way of getting high, like not in a natural way,
Yeah,
through
yeah.
creativity, right? I've noticed this catharsis when I'm making movies, when I'm doing the art form, that the manifestation of character, the building blocks of all of that, has this kind of liberating consciousness that makes you feel quite free when you're doing it. It's hard, so that's another reasons why I'm drawn to the art form itself and not so much the result, because like I said a few moments ago, the results are going to vary, and there's going to be people that are not going to be singing the praises of this film, that film, and 20 other movies you do. And if you get too attached to that, you'll go crazy. You just gotta kind of let it go and be grateful that there's opportunities to talk to people like yourself who appreciate something enough to want to dialogue about it. And then, just focus on that and tune out everything else. So that's why it's a paradox. I don't let the compliment put me under the spell too quickly of this graduation into a position of marketplace that says that maybe I am potentially part of the selling point now. Cool, but that doesn't mean 10 critics from the UK or Europe are going to necessarily like the film. Do you know what I mean? So it's a double-edged sword. Just because it suggests this, then you bear a greater responsibility based on the judgment factor when people look at it. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah.
So you got to be careful with the position that you've been anointed with. Are you going to take it serious, or are you going to take the art form serious? To me, I take the art form serious. Clearly, I have no control what happens in the editing room. I have no control over people's perception or what the critics think. All I can do is say thank you to the director and the writer for allowing me an opportunity to do something different, and then move on to the next thing, That's all there is to me. Not much else.
Well, I know you said it happened maybe 10 years ago, but I just want to mention, my mom, white, uh, uh, Texas, upper, like maybe middle class, for every receptionist, there is a woman like my mom who knows who you are, respects your art. Like there are people that do. So that's a misfortune, and as far as the receptionist, because or whoever you dealt with in those situations, because they had no idea what they were dealing with. um I want to jump to maybe something a little more personal, because I really appreciated that answer. You have 47 projects in some sort of production right now, based on what's IMDb is saying. I'm sure there's many more, but I want to ask about Gabriel's trial, based on your book. I saw that that's in production as well, has your name attached, as, obviously writing and starring in. What can we expect from that, and where are we on that?
The book will be published soon.
Yeah.
Hopefully by the end of the summer. Because of COVID and everything, apparently there's been a paper shortage, so it delayed the release of the book. In terms of its pre-production status as a film, management is still considering the possibility of producing, depending on all the other, those aspects of movie making that require remuneration. You have to get funding and things like that.
Yeah.
So we'll see. There's been interest to have it produced, and I want to wait and just see how the book is received. It was something that I wrote. I had to write. It was catharsis. It was just something like a fever dream. I just needed to get it out of me. So, it's basically, it's, I guess it has, it's a basic, it's a supernatural type thriller. It focuses on this guy who's an artist who works at a tattoo shop and is implicated in a murder. Some girl goes missing, and the locals in the small town that he works in are not crazy about the influence that him and his friend, his partner at the tattoo shop, are making on some of the young people in the community. They feel that their presence in the community is the degradation of the morality that they're trying to raise their children with. They feel that the tattooing and some of the imagery that the children or the young people are putting on their bodies are like heresy to the local church. And so they're trying to, there's this push to kind of get rid of this particular guy, Gabriel, and his partner. So when the girl ends up missing and these weird things start happening in the way I constructed the story, because I introduced the idea of witches and black magic and people and the occult. I wanted to explore that aspect of things to demonstrate how people perceive tattooed people, and I wanted to show the hardline fundamentalist religious types how they perceive it. And so I wanted to basically present the argument between the two schools of thinking and have Gabriel kind of be in the middle. Like, he's not necessarily a black magician, he's not necessarily with the church, he's just an artist who falls in love with this woman who ends up missing and is implicated in her disappearance. And his friend who owns this business with him at the tattoo parlor is probably the only one who believes that Gabriel is not guilty of the crime, but also starts to notice that Gabriel's sanity is becoming more and more comes into question. And so that's another aspect of the story. So I wanted to explore a very unconventional type love story that lives in this murky fever dream type thing, that also introduces the occult and presents circumstances in the storyline that you think you understand what's happening, and then there's a churning point in the story and you're like, wait a minute, was that even real? So there's many layers to the way I wrote this thing, so that just when you go down this linear pathway and you think you're going to come to a conclusion, something happens, realize everything you've experienced thus far is not what you imagine it to be, kind of like that. So I wanted to, and I was in a state of mind when I wrote it that it was very easy to write it because of how I was feeling in my life. So Gabriel's Trial, in a nutshell, is a story about reclamation, reclaiming something that's been lost, whether it's innocence. It's a love story. It's a spiritually driven drama that deals with people who find themselves at stages in their life where they have to transition out of a way of thinking and being that has held them captive, either themselves or people around them. So it's, in the end of the day, I would say Gabriel's Trials is a murder mystery, psychological thriller, and a story of reclamation. Ultimately, its conclusion is love.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, if that's not a selling point, I don't know what is. Yeah, when I first was looking or kind of digging to get prepared for this, I found some information, not as much as was just laid out for me, but I mean, definitely I will be following up with that one, or following to see where that goes. I wanted to mention, or at least touch on, in the film of the devil, I noticed some universal monster tattoos. I hadn't noticed them prior. Obviously I've seen many of your films, many of your performances, but you tend to mention old Hollywood as an influence. And
Yeah.
it's hard for me to not believe, that these monsters, inspired you as well. Human Centipede 3, Strangeland, Carnival of the Souls. Like, I mean, the list goes on. And I mean, even you talking about Gabriel's Trial, I can see kind of like the Frankenstein monster influence within that as well.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. the crowd of locals, with the torches, trying to, rid the town of the pariah. Let's get rid of the monster. Get the monster.
I mean, is there anything you want to touch on as far as maybe the monsters?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think the tattooing in of itself was a form of, it was an exorcism for me. It was a way to deal with a lot of my internal struggles and conflicts that most people deal with in the form of art. I took the demons that were festering within and brought them to the surface. The good news is that I wasn't alone. You know, as I observed filmmakers like Ray Harryhausen and these groundbreaking animators who created these monsters like the Cyclops from the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, you know, and the Greek mythology, you know, Jason and the Argonauts, the Hydra. I fell in love with so much of this, these images that to me pointed to something that I could relate to, whether these beasts or aberrated creatures suffered some type of captivity or torture. I could relate to that. And to watch it play out in some mythos that was, you know, of a different time made it seem, fantastic. You know, it was, and it lent a romantic quality to it that I didn't feel in my day-to-day life. So to tattoo the Cyclops from the Seven Voyages of Sinbad on my body, or the Frankenstein monster, or the werewolf, you know, were ways for me to feel that I was allowed to bear the mark of something that I had a personal relationship to, because cinema was like, for me, it was like the way a religious person would go to the synagogue, to the church, or the ashram. I would go to watch these movies as a child and feel like I was in some holy place, watching these deities manifest before me on the screen, and I could relate to a lot of them, you know, probably because a lot of them were tortured. And so the images do, you know, clearly I don't have like Disney characters tattooed on a portion of my body. It's a lot of what people would perceive as dark imagery, but to me, it was just catharsis. It was a way to come to terms with a lot of the feelings I had, like a visual poem. A lot of the great artists from, you know, 13th century, whatever that was, Erroneous Bosch. I think that's how, you know, you see his depictions of hell, of things that he envisioned, and that weren't very pretty, but they're fascinating to look at. You know, it makes you kind of wonder what was going on in the minds and psyche of some of these men who saw the world in a way that maybe most conventional minded people don't. And I feel kind of like I can relate to that. And so these filmmakers from the golden age of Hollywood who produced these iconic, what people call monsters or creatures, or, you know, Creature from the Black Lagoon, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I feel even the Bride of Frankenstein, this whole idea of this, you know, this poor, disassociated being trying to find love in the midst of this nightmare, being manipulated by this evil scientist, you know. And at the end of the day, at the end of it all, she just looks at him and hisses at him. Poor guy. It's like just looking for love, like the song in all the wrong places, you know. So there's a romanticism that comes with the horror. I feel if you look deeper into it, that some of us who lived a certain way can identify with, and so why not? I mean, I'll give you an example. The film The Exorcist, ironically, you know, Eileen Dietz of the devil. I have the Pazuzu tattoo on my forearm here. It's kind of faded out, but I have the Pazuzu tattooed on my arm there.
Yeah.
And so that film, I think for a lot of people who grew up in the 70s, who saw it in the theaters, made huge impact because we've never seen anything like that before. William Friedkin definitely raised the bar in terms of a different approach to, I wouldn't even call it horror. I don't feel like The Exorcist is a horror movie. I feel
It's
like
like
it's
storytelling in general.
it's a drama, and it has definitely spiritual connotations and very deep rooted meanings and spiritualism and stuff like that. But that movie changed my life. It really like made quite an impact on me. I think a lot of people. It was a shock, and it frightened me for a while. Ironically, because I was convinced that after that movie, that the devil was following me around everywhere, and was eventually going to catch me. You know, and that would be the end of it. I'd become possessed, and there'd be nothing. So for years, I lived in this peril, like this sense of peril. Oh, you know. And then one day, I just said, you know what? Rather than running away, why don't you just run toward it? So I ran toward it, and I put my arms around it. I guess it's very kind of Buddhist or Zen. You know, I became one with it. The irony is, all these years later, I'm in this film of the devil.
Yeah.
and manifesting something. And the thing was, when we shot that sequence with the child, I was concerned because I can't remember the young man who plays the lead, forgive me, but I was worried about him at first because I guess when I get into a character, people have told me that my frequency, the vibration of my energy changes, and I become a little quite intense. And I noticed that the child was starting to shake. He was really shaking. He was becoming very frightened because when I left that object up in the air to, to simulate, this, the impact of it, I think he believed I was really I was going to do it for real. And I kept stopping in between takes and talking to the father and asking, are you sure that your son is okay? Because I'm worried about him. He's shaking. He's not just acting, like he's really frightened. And I thought, how ironic, because I looked at that child and I saw myself. I remember how when I was a child, I would shake, clearly the context is different, but it was ironic to me that here I am, this, dark priest, performing this rituals supposedly to try to help this child. And yet the child is horrified. And it just, for a moment, I thought, wow, man, things have a way of kind of coming around.
Yeah.
But the good thing is we put a happy ending to this. Once we finished the sequence, or in between the sequence, I kept joking with the child. I kept, making jokes about ridiculous things. I turned into Goofy at Disneyland. I became ridiculous. I did all sorts of things to make him realize that I was harmless and that I was kind of ridiculous, kind of clown type guy, And I really think that helped calm him down a lot, because I felt like I have a responsibility, because it's not just working. It's different when you work with grown men and you go into combative situations in movies. A lot of movies I do clearly are not comedy, right? So there's a lot of intense sequences that involve violence and the degradation of humanity. And there's this unspoken agreement of respect, and we both, okay, we're going to go to hell, man, together, but we're going to go there with respect, and we're going to go there without judgment, and we're not going to harm one another. We're going to invoke this thing, make it real as possible, but at the end of the day, we're not going to try to harm one another for real. We got to be careful. But you're dealing with another man. But when you're dealing with the innocence of a child, this was tricky for me to. And there was a part at one moment in the sequence where I felt a tendency to pull back on my natural inclination to really embody, which is what I do. I go full, as I say, balls to the wall. I don't pull the punch. But for a second, I thought, if I go all the way, I'm going to give this kid a heart attack. So that's why it was so important to me to be able, in between the takes, to talk to the father and talk to the child and establish trust with this young boy, to the point where he started to realize that I was just pretending. And then we were able to do this and complete it. So
That's awesome to hear, because I watched the film last night. He was probably one of the strongest takeaways from the film, like when he's shaking after he talks to is playing with the dog. And I mean, that's really awesome to hear that you kind of went out of your way to make sure he was comfortable. He'll probably remember that for the rest of his life. But you mentioned, like, I also noticed this too with your quotes. You kind of say, like, movie saved your life, and you have a lot of really interesting influence as far as like what we get on screen. I went and saw Richard Dreyfuss actually speak, and he was talking about, going to a film or seeing a film in theater is like kind of like going to church. You see these like religious, like larger than life people speak to you. It's almost like a stage play. And then you get there, you watch it, and then you leave. It's an interesting experience. With television, on the other hand, which I know you're very familiar with that, like television, you're kind of inviting these people into your house every week. Like, they become a staple of your day. And because of which, I kind of want to jump to X-Files. I literally watched your episode today, The Amazing Malini. It's a fantastic one, and I like it because it is one that you can watch and this is kind of what ignited this conversation. You can watch it with the whole family. X-Files is this episodic show where, some they have their ups and downs, some are, grittier than others. But this particular episode, you play Sissy Alvarez, and I mean, fantastic from start to finish. You look a little
Thank
bit
you.
different in this role, but I was curious about your experience, alongside Mulder and Scully.
Um, First off, I was just felt very grateful to be invited in. When I read, I had, like everything, like most of us, you go in, you audition, you audition, you audition. When I got the call that they were interested in hiring me, I was really excited, and because it was such an iconic show, just to
Yeah.
be a part of that. And then when I read the script and I realized to what degree I was going to be involved, and I thought, wow, this isn't just some little bit.
Yeah.
So yeah, there was that aspect of things, and then meeting um, the two leads. Um, they were very nice to me. Everybody on the show was really nice to me, and David Duchovny. I think
Yeah.
David
Yeah.
Duchovny. He took me aside and talked a little bit. I got the sense about him, like he asked me where you're from. He had this smile, very charming. You know, it's like what you see is what you get with him. He's a very charming, kind of personable, friendly guy. I spoke with him mostly. He just wanted, hey, where are you from? And we talked a little bit. It was nice. It felt comfortable. Um, and I didn't realize the impact that would make. Like you don't think about the impact of these things. You just do, and then whatever happens, happens. But when I watched the show, I actually really enjoyed the episode. It's like, wow,
Yeah.
it's so cool what they did by framing the character Sissy by having the guy put the fake tattoos because he apparently the Sissy had tortured him in prison, right? So he wanted to get him back by framing him for this crime. I love that they went to such extensive work to recreate the tattoos on somebody. So for all the indignities I had to bear, over the years with playing these what people would call stereotypical characters, I thought it was so cool that they took the time to utilize my art that I was wearing as part of the story. That was quite I felt a compliment. Others might see it differently, but I didn't see it that way. I'm like a guy who's, cup is half, I'm a cup half, it's half, half full type of guy,
Yeah.
a guy. I see it that way. So I was just like, wow, this is so cool. Did that. So it was a good experience. And then there was a spin-off to that, I think, called The Lone Gunman, right?
Yeah.
And so I worked with those actors as well, and that was another fun experience, and was treated very nicely and had a good time.
Yeah, I haven't seen that episode, unfortunately. I do have that DVD though, so I will be watching that with the wife later today. She's a huge X-Files fan, and oddly enough, we did talk about your tattoos, and there are a lot of I guess you could say there with the characters and things like that. There are, like, I guess, commercial entities, you could say. Has there ever been a moment where you've had to do a reshoot or shoot a sequence over again to maybe avoid, showing something like Frankenstein or a brand or something like that?
No,
Okay.
I don't think. Let me think. No, the only instance where they had to cover up the tattoos was on a TV show I did back in, I think it was in, I don't know when it was, the 90s. Stephen Bochco produced a series called NYPD Blue. And I had tattoos on my neck, and they wanted to do a makeup test to see if they could cover them because they felt that not so much that they had a problem with me having tattoos on my neck. They just thought it'd be the character that I portray kills an off-duty fireman in a robbery, and they thought it'd be way too easy to identify him. The tattoos on his neck, so they wanted to cover them up to make it harder for them to figure out whether this guy is the actual, this guy was the actual murderer. So they did a makeup test. And so that's the only time I remember them. And I've done some movies recently where they've just simply covered them up because I just did a Western where this character in the 18th century, 19th century, So it wouldn't be appropriate. The tattoos are too modern, so they put a scarf on me and they put gloves to cover up. So if anything, it's just so that I can live in a different time period that the
Yeah,
tattoos aren't indicative of. But I don't think there's ever been any issue with branding. It's more
gotcha.
or less just with respect to the timeline and the storytelling.
Yeah, the reason I have a friend that she's she shot a movie down here in Dallas, and they had to do some reshoots or do some B-roll to kind of cover up, certain images.
Mm.
I was just curious from your perspective. I have just a couple more, and then we can wrap it up.
Okay.
While you were great in X-Files, I can't not mention Escobar.
Mm.
That role is so iconic. Gary Newman has never seemed so frightening. Honestly, now that I think about it, that character always had a badass soundtrack going on in the background. Hey, Sean, what a surprise. Hey, you want to give me a spot? Or the old school, and he does like the Coke. Do you miss the 80s, man? Dude, I cannot tell you how much that role meant to me. I'm going to get a little personal with you. So I had heart surgery in 2009, open heart surgery, the whole deal.
Wow.
And this show, your role kept me going. Like, I watched this series to recover. I watched season 1 multiple times just because I loved you so much.
Praise God.
My wife actually just broke her leg, and guess what she's watching? Nip Tuck. First time to ever go through it. And like, without getting too cheesy, I have to tell you thank you, because that that is just something that I can always recommend. And it's because, not only because of you, but you definitely play a huge role in it. It's just that role, that writing, it's so iconic. You are fantastic. So thank you so much, sir.
I'm glad that I could assist you.
It's all good, man. I just want to know, what steps did you take to make that character come to life? I know that wasn't all in the paper, and I know that a lot of that was you, shining through, and ultimately what that role means to you. I know that that kind of led to a lot of the next steps, and I just want to hear it from you, man.
Prior to Nip Tuck, there had been quite a few television shows that I guest starred on where I played, these drug lord type characters or kingpins. And so I felt like all those shows were a precursor or training ground for what I did on Nip Tuck. That combined with the extraordinary writing, direction, and insight of the people who created that show, Ryan Murphy mainly. I think that collaboration combined with what I had been practicing prior to Nip Tuck and the writing and the freedom that Ryan Murphy gave me and the freedom I gave myself to go as deep down the rabbit hole as possible, humanly possible, man, without judgment. Because there's some things I did on the show, that some sequences that at first it was shocking to me, but it's like jumping into a swimming pool, and then you start swimming around a little bit. And
Mhm.
after a while, it's no big thing, man. That's what it was like. It was shock treatment to be on Nip Tuck at times. But then you just relax and you trust the process and just allow yourself the freedom to go to hell or go wherever you're going without judgment. I had no idea, though, the impact that it would make. To me, it felt similar in its scope in terms of the manifestation of ruthlessness and barbarism that I had been carrying in these characters of manifestation that I had done repeatedly from one TV show to the next, to the next, to the next. I was the go-to guy at that time for these sort of roles. So, like I said, everything prior to Nip Tuck, I felt was training ground for this ultimate heavyweight fight,
Mhm.
which I had no idea would make the kind of impact socially that it did when I went to the premiere. They had it in Hollywood, the Dome Theater on Hollywood Boulevard. I don't think it's there anymore, but where they sized it down considerably. But it was this huge auditorium, I think. And I remember going in, and no one really spoke to me. And they showed the pilot episode there, the first episode where they introduced Escobar. And once the lights came up, I remember getting up, and all of a sudden, all eyes were on me, and people started coming up to me and talking to me. Old agents that represented me came up to me apologizing for God knows what politics may have occurred back in those days. Because I think it dawned on them and everybody else, like everyone but me, that it was going to be a game changer for me. And people came up and said, "Man, this is going to change your life." It didn't quite. I didn't get it. All I saw is that everyone treated me differently after the lights came up. I went to the after party. I remember how I felt for the first time in many, many years, special, I guess, in relationship to that circumstance. Not that I needed them to validate my existence, and maybe I did back then. Maybe not so much now, but back then it was that sense of arriving. But it's so shocking when it happens. There's a part of you that doesn't want to believe it. Like, how is this possible? When you're the guy who's been told to leave auditions because you're in the wrong place, and now all of a sudden you're walking into this kind of place with all the VIPs of FX and all
Yeah.
the corporate powerful people are looking at you and going, "Great job, Robert. Thank you for making our show." It was surreal. And it took me years for it to. I remember walking around in Santa Monica in California, and people coming up and say, "Hey man, he's like, on the show, can't you feel the power? Can't you?" And I had no idea what they were talking about. I didn't feel anything. I was just like another. I was just trying to get through the day.
Yeah.
I was not even aware. I wasn't aware till later the impact that I had made. So, but yeah, that was the preparation. Quite a few shows prior to Nip Tuck, I had been investigating that character disposition that you saw Escobar manifest. I just ultimately met with a writer and a production team that were ready to take it to a whole other level and make the character so much more dynamic than anything I'd done prior to that.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, and I mean it when I say it. It means a lot to me. Is there anything that you would like to mention before we wrap up? Is there maybe a project
Yeah.
that maybe some fans might overlook that sticks out to you as an amazing performance? And then also, where can people find you online?
There's a film that's coming out this year called Johnny and Clyde. It's a horror comedy starring Megan Fox and can't remember some of the other actors, but keep an eye out for that. I think it'll be a little bit. I wear a wig, a blonde wig, which was kind of fun to do something like that. So
We got
keep an eye out for that.
Bei Ling, Vanessa Angel,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
Tyson Ritter, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, this
Yeah.
is a fantastic cast, yeah.
I would keep an eye out for that one. I felt really good about them giving me some opportunity to do a little bit to play with Southern accents and other type of accents. Once he has the wig on, he speaks one way. He takes the wig off, he speaks a different way. So I thought that was pretty cool. There's another film called Isaac starring R.J. Mitty and Dove Cameron that's supposed to be released this year that I'm quite proud of. My friend Josh Weber directed. I saw the rough cut. I think it's a brilliant film. It's a psychological thriller about a serial killer. So I'm looking forward to that release. I'm also directing my own film called American Trash. I'm in production right now. I'm about 3/4 through the film. I'm very excited to finally be at the helm of something that has personal meaning to me. It's also like Gabriel's Try. It's a love story, but a bit tragic, and deals with the social social conflicts within Los Angeles and the the environmental ruination of that world as it starts to fall into ruination because of pollution, also the violence of the city, and the California dream in that once was that I so much romanticized has been disappearing from decade to decade to decade. I wanted to make a movie that shows that despite the fall of the great Los Angeles and what it promised from the 50s up until now, that there's still a spirit of love despite turbulent circumstances, and that friends can care for one another. And the character that I portray is a man who comes back from the war as a combat vet. He loses his girlfriend to a violent crime and basically goes off the rails, and his friends come together to help him, and the sister of the deceased befriends him and tries to help him come to terms with forgiveness so that he can move on with his life and not become this monster in it. So it's another story of reclamation. It also deals with social aspects of the city, the environmental aspects of our world, the apathy of our communities, especially the big cities like Los Angeles. And this is a story I've wanted to tell for some time because I was always enamored and fascinated by the 60s. And I wanted to bring that spirit back into the 21st century in the form of characters that still believe that we can preserve our natural habitat, not destroy what's left of it. And I wanted to communicate something like that in the present.
Did you always want to write, or is that something that kind of came to be? Because you have all of these fantastic stories in you, and every single one of them sounds interesting. So I'm just, where did that come from?
I just think it came out of necessity for sanity's sake.
I like it.
Yeah, I never sat down and thought, yeah, I want to write. Some people would tell me, I remember a couple of directors said, you should, I'd have a conversation, share some ideas, and they go, do you write? I go, no. And they would say, you should. And so after hearing that enough times, and then ultimately having no choice, it's like you don't want to write.
Yeah.
I never wanted to write. I had no choice but to eventually write to save my mind. Just like movies saved my life. It wasn't enough after a while because I had been utilized by other people for their catharsis and their storytelling. I wanted now to create my own so that I could heal myself, use the art form not as an exploit or vanity fair, but to help heal myself. And maybe in that healing, others could relate to some of the character archetypes I was playing with and also be healed as well. Just like you said, watching it help you recover, and your wife as well. Maybe I can tell stories that are a little more responsible in the way they communicate creative aspect of things in the marketplace, not so exploitive. I've been a part of quite a bit of the exploits of entertainment. I get it. It's a business. People want to see certain things. I get it. I don't mock it, but I really feel like I have a responsibility now to, if I'm going to communicate something and I have the power and the money to do it, why not make a movie? For years, people said, Robert, when are you going to do your own thing, man? When are you going to direct your own movie? When are you going to write your own movie? When are you going to star in your own thing? When are you going to communicate something that has value to you, man, or something which you feel? Forget about what people think and care what they think. When are you going to be honest about your struggle, man, and use that? Tell a story with people. They might be helpful. Who knows? Give it a shot. So I went, okay. And finally, here I am doing it out of necessity. It's not a Vanity Fair. It's not a glory story. I'm not trying to get to some next level. It doesn't exist. I simply have no choice but to do it so that I can get it out of me,
Yeah. I like how all of your answers end up either being necessity or love, and ultimately those kind of work hand in hand. So we got American Trash coming, in the midst. I want to mention, here at CineDump, we let the doers know how they're doing, and Robert, you're doing just fine. Thank you so much for your time, and everyone, be sure to check out Of the Devil. Will be available digital release on August 9th through Uncorked Entertainment. Thank you, sir. It's been a blessing. And one more thing, is that a bird? Do you have a bird?
A bird.
Yeah, I was hearing a bird. Was
Yeah,
there?
there's birds outside the window. Yeah, there's a bunch of them. Right, there's a nest like in the trees.
Cool. I was like, okay, breaking news, Robert LaSardo, bird aficionado.
Yeah, there's a bunch of them out the window. Right,
Okay,
tree
cool.
over there. Yeah.
Excellent, man.
It's
Well, thank you. I appreciate your time. Have a good day. And yeah, here to help.
Thank you, brother.